Good evening, everyone. I call to order the 28 May 2019 meeting of the Victoria City Council. First order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, announcements. Dana?
Nothing from staff, Mayor.
Council, any announcements?
Nope.
Oh. Okay. Open forum. I don't have any slips. Is there anybody in the audience that would like to address the council? Going once, twice, sold. Agenda. Let's go ahead and get this started. I move that we approve the agenda. Sorry, it's been a while. It's an extra day. I forgot how to do this. I move that we approve the agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion, council, anything to add? Dana?
Nothing from staff, Mayor.
Council? No. No. If there's nothing else, then all those in favor signify by saying aye. 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 All opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Consent agenda. Anybody in the audience, staff, council, wants to pull anything off the consent agenda? Well, first, I move that we approve the consent agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
Now discussion. Is there anybody that would like to pull anything off? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Hearing none, motion carries unanimously. Okay, first order of business. Draft Emerald Ash Borer Management. Ann, this is yours.
Yes, good evening, Mayor and Council. As you recall, back in October of 2018, you authorized Rainbow Tree Care Company to complete a tree inventory, and that included city parks and also boulevard areas. From that inventory, Rainbow created a draft Emerald Borer management plan that is in draft form that will be presented to you this evening. And Mr. Jeffrey Hafner from Rainbow Tree Care, who has been working with us on this project, is here. He's got a little PowerPoint presentation. And once we go through that, I'm sure he will be happy to answer any questions that you guys may have. Again, there's no action being asked of you tonight. Merely for discussion purposes. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff.
Hi, Jeff. Name and position for the record, please.
My name is Jeff Hafner. I'm the Director of Municipal Consulting at Rainbow Tree Care.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Thank you, Ann, Mayor, Council. Thanks for having me. I work almost exclusively in managing Emerald Ash Borer for local units of government. Happy to answer questions as they come up throughout the presentation. None so far?
Nope.
So back in 2009, we discovered Emerald Ash Borer in Minnesota, and at that time, Rainbow Tree Care declared that they were going to be the source of Minnesota managing EAB differently. Lots of states out east had seen their public and private trees killed by the thousands and tens of thousands before anybody really had an opportunity to take any action. Minnesota is in a sweet spot because we've learned from those mistakes isn't even the best word because they just didn't know. We've learned a lot in the 15 years since it was first discovered, really 17 years. It was discovered in 2002 in Detroit. So as part of that commitment, we created my position, which is working directly with cities, and looked at reducing any barriers that keep tree owners from keeping their ash trees alive. So what I do for cities then is I combine the insights really from the national level of university research with what it takes to implement these strategies on the ground through municipal governments, through working with homeowners, whatever it takes. I take the information that we've learned at the university level and put it to work. Through that, I've developed comprehensive plans, just like the one in draft form currently before you, and then as part of that built an economic model that helps a municipality look at future costs that are associated with really the two actions that are available, to keep ash trees or to not keep ash trees. And you'll see slides out of that economic model, which is in your draft plan as well. So I took just a couple shots not to have too many charts. I like to find the sweet spot of number of charts in a presentation. So let me know how I did as we go. But this is really what we're talking about. We're talking about trees in cities. And I often say we have a lot of ash trees in our Minnesota cities for two reasons. We planted a lot of them, but also a lot of them survived. That's not my vote. So a lot of them survived because they can tolerate conditions like this. So I pick on this tree because it's growing essentially in nothing but concrete. And the picture on the left, you can see during the winter very clearly sidewalks, streets, construction. That development that's in the background is much newer than the tree itself, so that tree survived as that development grew. And then on the right, you can see really the benefits that that tree is providing. That's a 3-story building that's completely in afternoon shades. You can imagine how much hotter those south-facing decks would be if that tree weren't there. So that tree has survived a lot of stuff before emerald ash borer got here. So it's a great tree to have. It's a great fighter. And so it provides a lot of benefits, and I kind of summarized the benefits that all trees provide. The big one is reducing stormwater runoff, so the leaves and the branches capture rain as it falls from the sky and funnel more of that into the ground, keeping it off of that impervious surface that just puts it into pipes and puts it into our lakes and our streams. More of that rainfall in the soil is a great benefit for cities as our infrastructure ages and as our growth exceeds, our ability sometimes to keep up. So saving energy, like I said, those 3 stories of shade are using less air conditioning. They're storing carbon. They're also improving air quality, which is improving human health. Trees really make cities more livable, just as a bottom line. They reduce crime, they reduce noise, and what I think is really sweet is they do all of that while being very popular. It's hard to find any tree haters, and maybe I should have started by asking if there are any tree haters, because we could have dealt with that first. But it's hard to find them because trees do all of this stuff just by standing there and looking good. So as infrastructure, they're great.
I got to ask, how do they
Sure.
reduce crime?
Excellent question. I'm really glad you asked because it's easy to just disregard that point. There are numerous studies that show green spaces invite more people out into them. And when more people are out into them, crime is going down versus like a desolate, concrete, barren place where people don't want to take their kids and don't want to recreate. Those are the areas we see an increase in crime because there's fewer eyes out watching. But I'm really glad you asked. And all of this is, there are studies to back up this data. So if you still don't believe me, I'm happy to provide you with supplemental.
I'm just curious.
No, great question. I keep it further down on the list because it is one that's kind of hard to get. The shade everybody gets, like that. It's cooler in shade than it is in sun. So as Ann mentioned, we did a complete inventory of the public trees, and there you can see all the points on the map, over 5,500 trees. And I looked at this image a lot, and I've looked at this data a lot. It kind of looks like a scorpion right there, that image, anyway, for what that's worth. I don't know why, but it does. So the good news is there are 74 unique species in that 5,500. The average size, and you'll hear this measurement a lot, the diameter at breast height, it's a measurement across the stem, 4.5 feet above the ground. The average of the total inventory is 8. So on the smaller side, which you would expect to see in a kind of a newer growing community where a lot of the trees have been planted within the last 5 years. So no big surprises there. I do mention that there are 74 unique species. It is still largely consolidated into 15. I can't remember the number, Ann, but the top 15 species are like a large percentage of it, which isn't uncommon either. But it gets to that point of where we're going in a community. Diversity of our tree population makes us more resilient for whatever is next. It's EAB now. There's likely something else behind it. And then we can focus from that total inventory into just the ash trees. 931 of them. Each of them got a condition rating, and that's important. All the trees got a condition rating. But when it comes to evaluating the actions we take with the ash trees, it's important to look at what their current condition is. That dimension that I mentioned, DBH, of around 10,200. So that's an average of 11. So you can imagine the average tree is about 12 inches across at 4.5 feet above the ground. So then if we're interested in figuring out what kind of benefits a tree that size provides, there is a very helpful tool in this tree benefits calculator, in which you can enter in your average tree size and what kind of tree it is, and it'll spit out what those benefits are. And just like I mentioned, the reduced heating and air conditioning, the stormwater value, property value is included in there, natural gas use, the CO2 that it's sequestering, and then air quality and electricity. You can kind of see that breakout. So that 12-inch ash tree that is your public average is providing benefits of about $110 a year. Like I said, just standing there doing what it's doing. Now, with EAB, you will be forced to spend money managing it. If you don't do anything, your ash trees will be killed by emerald ash borer, and that will cause an action of likely removal. Hopefully for each tree that gets removed, it has a replacement tree put in its place. But I think it's important to kind of look at, as you decide what you're doing and the costs that are associated with it, keep in mind that bigger trees are providing more benefits. So some of the charts I'll show you is like a value of benefit relative to cost of action. So just keep that in mind. No questions? Man. Fast learners. So then EAB shows up, and on the left you can see what the adult looks like. That's how it gets its name. It's emerald in color. It's quite striking. It's very tiny. It fits on a penny. It's very small. You likely are not going to see it anywhere in the wild. You can see it in some jars. And then on the right I show the life cycle. And the life cycle is important because that's what we're looking when we're trying to decide what management activities we're choosing. So we're entering the phase of emergence. The adults will emerge mid to late June, and they'll fly around for a number of days before they reproduce and lay eggs. Those eggs will then hatch this summer and burrow into the bark where the larva then will feed, and that's the red arrow. That's where most of the damage is done, is by the larval stage. It's important, though, to not overlook that adult stage where they're flying around to other trees and feeding before they reproduce. And that's when, if you have treated trees in your environment, you have the opportunity to kill the insects and slow down their rate of growth. Because this pest is damaging because it doesn't have any natural predators, and its host, the ash tree, has no natural resistance. The insect evolved in a completely different ecosystem. Our trees aren't used to it at all, so they don't put up a fight, and the insect reproduces at an exponential rate. So that the larval damage starts to look like this. Now, this tree was dead at the time, but you can see how no species resistance to the damage and an exponential level of reproduction can do a lot of damage quickly. So that's on a single tree scale. When you start to imagine that happening for dozens or hundreds or even thousands of trees, we start to see what we call the EAB death curve. Now, this data was taken from an unmanaged watershed in Ohio. As I mentioned, states to our east got EAB first, and they were trying to figure out what was going on. So as part of that evaluation, they were looking at how fast trees die. Now, the dotted line on that graph is where they dug back into growth rings and found EAB damage, like historical EAB damage. And you can see the rate of tree mortality was pretty slow for a number of years. Once they started direct measurements in 2004, a large chunk of trees died in those first 2 years because you see that exponential increase in number of insects starting to show up in exponential mortality of infected or infested hosts. Did I explain that in a way that's clear? Because that part's important. That graph is going to show up a lot because that's, like I said, unmanaged. If we do nothing, that's how fast our trees will die. They won't die for a while, and then once they start dying, they're going to die really fast. We see this everywhere. We see this in Minnesota. Yes.
Are the smaller the tree, are they more susceptible, or the older the tree, they're more susceptible, or doesn't it matter?
It doesn't really matter. Early in the infestation, there's evidence to support that the ash borer will seek the stressed tree of any size. But that really only holds true in the early stages of the infestation. Once the insect population is really vibrant, they're going to be attacking everything. But initially, you'll likely find it in the most stressed trees first.
Where did this come from?
It came from China. We shipped it over here in untreated crates basically. So we just cut down trees, sawed them square, brought it over, the larva hatched. And we discovered it in 2002 in Detroit. I say we, the U.S. It was likely killing trees for a decade before, but nobody recognized it. Nobody could identify it. And in its native range, it's not a nuisance pest. It doesn't kill the trees in China. It doesn't kill the ash trees in China.
Really?
So it wasn't on any list of watch out for this pest because it wasn't killing anything. So it's related to our native borers, bronze birch borer, or the two-line chestnut borer, which, don't just roll off the tongue or aren't really as well known. But they attack our native birch trees and our native oak trees, and they've co-evolved. So a healthy birch tree or a healthy oak tree can put up a resistance to that infestation, and you don't really see a lot of damage until the tree gets stressed and loses its defenses. So that's more like the Chinese ash trees would be reacting in its native range with EAB. But here, like I said, the trees don't have a defense, so
Do we
they
have any
succumb.
sense of when the resistance will build up against this?
There are efforts to breed genetically resistant trees ongoing, and the news is hopeful that in my generation of still working to help municipalities, we will see genetically resistant ash material that can be replanted. So we're hoping soon, in the age of trees soon, but they're not likely to be big shade trees while I'm still doing this. So, but it's on its way, we hope. Great questions, though. I'll keep going. So everybody remember that curve. This is what that death curve looks like on the street. Now, I wasn't there. It was discovered in Toledo in 2003. 2006, this street in particular still looked fine, really fine. 3 years later, it was all standing dead. Now, you can imagine a municipality that's unprepared for that to happen on their right-of-way trees is going to be left with no options other than finding the money to get these trees down. What we see in those situations is that if the municipality can get the trees down, there is likely no money left for replanting. So that canopy deficit continues for longer because the next generation of trees can't be replanted. So we're definitely doing everything we can to avoid that. And those trees are bigger than your average ash tree here. But everything being equal, you stand to lose a lot of tree value if your trees die that fast. So this is kind of a marketing version of what Minnesota is facing. We're moving up that curve. We're certainly in the year of losing thousands across the metro, and the state will lose millions, hundreds of millions likely by the time it's all moved through. So that's what we're working against. The good news is, in the absence of genetically resistant material, tree protection does work. Trunk injection of pesticides kill the insects as they feed on the tree, and you can see it in action. These were taken outside of Toledo. The tree on the left, untreated, clearly pest pressure there. The tree on the right is treated, and I have countless versions of this, but the good news really is that tree protection works. And it's less expensive than removal and replacement. So you'll see that kind of a thread throughout the management plan as well. So when we kind of just distill down what the research is showing, tree protection is better than removal and replacement. And again, using graphics, big shade, way better than little shade or no shade. And really, the strategies and benefits of tree protection will work on any scale. If you choose to treat your backyard ash tree and it's the only treated ash tree in the community, it will stay alive and you can appreciate the benefits. However, if you can enroll more of the neighborhood scale into protecting ash trees, you're going to kill more insects in that environment, so then there'll be a slower mortality of the untreated trees. It gets better at the city scale. It gets even better at kind of that metro-wide scale. Does that make sense to everybody? We're killing insects instead of trees.
Right.
So, where is EAB? And maybe I should have asked you all, do you all know where EAB is? Everybody know your closest infestation? It is today. And I made this slide and submitted this slide prior to Minnetonka's infestation being kind of on the map. However, I can't really point. But that green line that kind of bisects the right hand of that map, that's what the Department of Agriculture culture calls their generally infested area, the new Minnetonka infestation doesn't really change that green line because the Minnetonka infestation is essentially due north of that Eden Prairie one. So Minnetonka is, close, but the satellite infestations in Orono and Prior Lake are also very close. So as satellite infestations, they are like, kind of a skip beyond a natural progression. And like the slides I showed from Toledo, there were instances where parts of Toledo were, at the converging wave fronts of two satellite infestations crossing, and that's where you'll see massive insect populations kind of converging on a spot, and tree death occurs very rapidly. So you're still outside of a generally infested area, so you're at the perfect spot to adopt a plan and take action. Usually, when EAB is found, it's 4 years old. The infestation is 4 years old because the damage takes a while to show up. At low levels, the insects are breeding and doing damage, but they're not really showing any signs in the canopy.
So they could be here and we don't know it?
Highly likely they're here, yes.
Are you going to show us a picture of what an ash tree looks like?
Oh, I didn't include that.
Oh.
I showed you all the circles on the map. Does that count?
I'll Google it.
Yeah, sorry, that's a good note. Yeah, left that part out. Wow. Always at your service, though. So,
I think it would talk if I had it in airplane mode.
it's always listening. So when we look at that management plan, that cost-benefit model that I said we built for municipalities really looks at 3 approaches. So the base case is like, I won't even call it the do nothing. It assumes that all the ash trees die at a normal rate as EAB moves through and that they're cut down and replaced in the same year that they die. So a better way to respond to it would be a response-only scenario. It's not do nothing. It's response only. We wait until the trees die and then we cut them down and replace them. Now, there are 2 plans. One's a recommended plan and one's an alternative plan. The recommended plan assumes the same tree removal and replacement policy is in the base case, but only for the low-quality trees. Remember that I said each tree was assigned a condition rating. So we say the trees that are in poor condition, yes, let's remove and replace those as they die. But let's also protect the high-quality trees. And in the recommended plan, we're using 8 inches as like our floor. In the alternative plan, we're using 10 inches. So in the recommended plan, there are more trees protected. Does that make sense? We're taking a greater population of trees because we're including smaller trees. Now, depending on how many years the city elects to implement this plan, it is likely that what is currently an 8-inch tree in 2 or 3 years will be very close to a 10-inch tree. So there's some opportunity there to just do the alternative plan and then hope that those currently smaller trees grow to a size that then get included in your alternative plan. And I hope I'm not confusing the matter by highlighting the gray area in between.
No, got it.
Okay. Now we start with the charts. And so here you can see the death curve in annual costs. So now remember, this is the base case, so this is the response-only scenario. Now we're cutting down and replacing trees as they die. So the good news is you spend all your money in 10 years, but you spend a lot of it. But after 10 years, your costs really drop down because you don't have any public ash trees left to be killed. Now when we look at cumulative costs, there you can see the same shape. Spikes up to 10 years, kind of stops. And I know it's small numbers. I mean, small font. They're not small numbers. I don't mean to diminish the value of them, but it is a small font. Now, I'll take a look at the recommended plan, but I want to call out kind of some of the assumptions that we've made, and I worked closely with Ann as we developed this to look at, like, what's reasonable for current city costs. So when we start at the top, we look at number of ash trees. We already talked about that, 931. If we look at that population of 8-inch and larger in the high-quality trees, their average is 12 inches. So remember when I said a 12-inch tree yields about $120 in annual benefits? That's going to be reoccurring throughout this analysis. The DBH of the trees to be removed are smaller because we're focusing on the bigger trees. So then the average of all trees is 11. Now that replacement tree is 2.5 inches. Now this is important because we're calculating the replacement canopy value as well as a comparison. And if I'm going too slow, I can skip the charts too. But you're all leaning in. And maybe that's because they're small, but maybe it's because that's the most interesting part. I don't know. I'll keep going. Then we look at the cost data. We look at removal cost per DBH. It's about $32 currently, and that can change one way or another, and I have lots to say about that. New tree cost, $250. When we look at treatment costs per DBH, I'm using $5 an inch because that is reasonable to assume the city elects a treatment program with staff, buys the necessary products and equipment, and just rolls it into their current operations. That's about what cities are spending currently to protect trees.
Did you say $5 an inch?
I did. Yep. For public trees in big projects with staff, yes.
Per year?
Per treatment. The treatment is good for 2 years. Some municipalities elect to extend it into 3. So then you can imagine the same tree that costs you $32 an inch to remove, you could treat 8 times. No, sorry, that math is wrong. 5 into 32, 6 times. But that's 6 treatments. So even if you went 2 years, you could keep that tree alive for 12 before you've just gotten back to the removal cost.
Go 3 years?
Not when you're doing a lot of treatments. So if you're actively working to keep your pest pressure low, you're starting early, you have a lot of trees under protection, you won't ever see that death curve spike. So that 3rd year is much less risky. If you're that sole homeowner with 1 backyard tree and nobody's protecting around you, that's more risky. Absolutely.
So is this forever?
It's for as long as you want to keep the ash tree. Yes, we
So
anticipate.
the treatment, to keep the tree alive, the treatment has to continue.
As long as there is EAB. Now, we do anticipate the industry changing, so there are future solutions that we haven't yet even considered. And once all of your untreated trees have been killed, you don't have any susceptible hosts. So in theory, you return to a level of pest pressure of 4 years ago because there aren't enough susceptible hosts to sustain a damaging population. So then we anticipate spreading the treatments out onto a 4 or 5 year interval because all we're trying to do is keep the damage relatively low. But part of the plan is to look at, what helps a municipality transition to the next generation of trees. So while you are going to get some cost savings in that first 20 years, investing that into a vigorous tree planting program now puts you in a great position in 20 years to have more replacement trees that are bigger.
Have you considered the possibility of them mutating?
It's really unlikely in an open, like outside of a controlled environment to have any devastating mutation show up in our lifetime. We see insects mutate or at least like build up a resistance in closed like greenhouse systems
Right.
where only the resistant ones are allowed to breed with other resistant ones. But you don't typically see that out in like an open ecosystem.
I was just wondering if they would adapt and still we would have to change the treatment, or they might go after another tree.
There is some evidence that they are going after other trees, but currently not any trees that grow here. So they've been able to force rear them on olives, which we don't have a lot to lose. And the white fringe tree has also been shown to be a susceptible host, but that's another understory kind of ornamental that we don't have here.
Okay.
And all of that, the future is always unknown, and I definitely don't mean to smooth over that part, but knowing what we know right now, we have the opportunity to keep our big, more valuable trees for as long as we want. If you remember that street in Ohio where they were left with only one option, those trees get very brittle because ash wood is inherently brittle anyway, and then when killed by EAB, they get very dry very fast. So the removal operations become more risky and more expensive. So even if you are currently electing to protect an ash tree that in 10 years you elect to remove, you've still spent less every year than its annual benefit, and it's in perfect health when you choose to remove it, which are both really valuable on the municipal scale.
Okay.
Can you stop if a tree is infested can you stop it and have the tree return to health?
You can, with some caveats. Depending on the level of infestation, we try to use a no greater than 30% canopy loss as a rule of thumb. So if you imagine a perfectly healthy tree having 100% of its canopy, if it's not more than 70% of that, the tree will be great. If it starts to get more attacked than that, what fails is the tree itself. The tree is not able to translocate the product into place, and we can keep the tree alive, but it will likely have a lot of deadwood and maybe not be the most physically gorgeous tree. But yes, the treatments are preventative and therapeutic.
Okay.
So now we fold in the comparison cost line for the recommended plan. Now keep in mind, this is protecting the high quality trees that are greater than 8 inches in diameter. And here you can see you get that same kind of bump during the peak years, but in the recommended plan, that's a smaller number of untreated trees that are dying and needing to be replaced. So that difference between the two lines is really the difference in removal and replacement between the two plans, if that makes sense to everybody. Then as you look out to year 13, that is our assumed decrease in treatment frequency. There we are returning to a lower pest pressure level and treating every 5 years instead of every 2 or 3, because we're just trying to keep trees in good health and just keep insects at likely what we're under right now, a level that exists but not doing damage.
Okay.
And then cumulatively, here you can see really after 20 years, you've spent less money by keeping these trees alive. And then all the, I was going to skip to all the charts. That's just a lot of numbers. Let's skip to all the charts. There you can see on the left, charts 1 and 2, which I just showed. And then as we move to chart 3, it's looking at cumulative tree value. So red is the base case by year 10 versus by year 20. Now look at the difference in cumulative tree value, because those bigger trees have been allowed to grow even larger. And tree canopy volume gets bigger as the trees get bigger and the value gets bigger. Inversely, then, you can see in chart 4 the tree value per dollar of cost. So each dollar that's invested in a tree protection program yields far greater value than a removal and replacement approach. And then 5 and 6 are looking at those peak year costs. 5 and chart 6 is the peak debris removal. So you're looking at, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, those years removing 10,000 inches of your urban canopy. So you've spent a lot more, you've kept a lot less. That's the main takeaway there. So EAB threatens the thousands of ash trees. Now, we inventoried the public trees. We did not inventory the private. There are likely lots of them because of the same reasons. A lot of them were planted and a lot of them survived. And those are providing excellent benefits as well, because those are shading people's homes, shading people's backyards. But we don't know how many there are. We know that responding to the death curve is going to consume public resources very quickly. That has been retold time and time again all across the country. Thousands of examples of that. Canopy loss negatively impacts quality of life. As I mentioned, trees make communities more livable for all of those reasons I talked about. And we know that current EAB best practices include all the tools, but especially those proactive treatments that keep trees healthy. We know that ash tree protection reduces pest pressure, and more importantly, it does so at the lowest cost. And as we reduce the pest pressure, we slow ash mortality for all ash trees, public and private. So you're providing spillover benefits onto the private side by protecting your public trees.
So the private homeowners, will they have access to this type of treatment?
Yes. Yep. And when I met with staff earlier, I did mention that many municipalities take an approach where they protect their public trees, and they elect to not do it with staff because staff is not often looking for a bunch more work to do. So they instead go through an RFP and select a vendor. And part of that request for proposals process would, mandate that any bidding contractor provide a bulk discount for the homeowners. And the cities can choose whatever level of participation they want for that, but it helps provide that reduced cost, that kind of bulk buying benefit for homeowners.
Okay, good.
But that would be up for you all to elect to do.
Okay.
And really, a balanced approach is still possible for Victoria. That's a really key message, that you have options, but that window is not going to stay open forever, and I can't tell you when it'll close. But what I can tell you is that our arborists that are out in the world, the metro right now, have seen more infested trees in 2019 than many of them have seen in their entire career, cumulatively. So it's on the rise. So, oh, yes, and as we reach that point where we have nothing but more and more dead trees, we don't have any other management options. Because like I said, trees have to be in a certain condition to get protected. So if we wait too long, we're only left with that response-only approach. So that's what I have. I'm happy to take whatever questions.
Yeah, so you guys inventoried Victoria for the public trees, I think it said 931 trees.
Public ash trees, yep.
You didn't find evidence of any infestation yet in any
Well,
ash trees?
Evidence is tricky. There are lots of signs and symptoms that look just like EAB. Anything that was suspicious enough, we made notes in the inventory and reported to staff that there are things that should be checked out. But it's not uncommon for municipalities to make numerous kind of false IDs before it's official, because you're looking for canopy thinning or woodpecker activity. Like, you can see that stuff in a lot of trees. Right now, we're dealing with ash anthracnose, which is it's a defoliating leaf disease, which is not lethal. It's not even long term, but canopies of ash trees will look a little thinner right now than maybe we would think they should. So it can create a lot of, false positives.
So do we have several, like, large stands of ash trees? So we have lots of other species here. So did we put all the ash trees together and all the maples together, or did we mix them up enough so that we can maintain some canopy as we lose ash trees?
There are large, and maybe, do you want to talk about that, Ann? There are larger stands. There are larger stands of ash trees that have, been left through development. However, the replanting, you can see streets of maple and streets of ash and you can see it show up kind of at that street level. Yeah. And that's what I was kind of hinting at, that there's plenty of opportunity for a more robust or a continued robust planting plan from the city with more diversity as an outcome. And there's always room for more trees.
So, and this was just a information briefing. There's no action being requested of the council tonight?
Correct, Mayor. I think that the bigger discussion point will be during budget session about whether or not and how much you would anticipate on utilizing our draft plan, moving it to a permanent plan, and then making that decision about how we move forward with whether or not to treat or not to treat.
What's the order of magnitude if we treat it? If we went in for this recommended option and phase it in over a couple of years, what's the impact on our annual budget? Using your numbers, which aren't the only numbers in the world.
They are not the only numbers in the world, no.
But they're a good base.
They are. And I pulled up this slide that I skipped over before. Did you like how I set you up for that great question?
Yeah, this is the most important slide.
But it's better when you set it up with a question, then everybody's like engaged at getting the information. So there you can see on the left, that chart is calling out the number of trees and all that data that I walked through. And then you can see years 1 through 10, the base case comparison to the recommended plan by action. And then the cumulative tree value. So that's in the top, it's years 1 through 10, and then on the bottom, it's years 1 through 20. So it includes the first 10 years plus the next 10.
So it's 318,000 a year in the first 10 years.
It's 318,000 cumulatively for the first 10 years.
31,000.
Well, that's even,
So it's 166.
because I see a cumulative number of 1,128,000
That's cumulative tree value.
tree value.
Yep.
So what's the annual cost average annual cost then? 32,000 a year?
It is. For the recommended plan, you can kind of make that per year average because treatment is something that you're choosing to do and you don't have to make any changes. For the base case, you can't kind of do that because the first couple of years are pretty quiet and then it spikes up.
I hope we don't have anyone thinking base case here. But
I'm glad to hear that.
Park and Rec looked at this and felt the recommended plan was pretty much a no-brainer, so.
The only question,
166,000 is the treatment cost for year 1 through 10?
Yep. Yep. So there are still trees that will be removed because they are low quality and then still replaced. And that's where there are some opportunities for changes. That chart on the left assumes that 75% of those high quality trees are treated. You could crank that up to 100%. And now your treatment costs would go up slightly, but your removal costs would go down quite a bit because now that difference is not going to be removed.
well, and if I'm reading this right, the removal costs that you have in there, we already have staff that would go out and if a tree needs to come down, so it's not an additional cost, it's additional time is what it is, right?
I'm not so sure about that. I think
No, a lot of the work, depending upon the size of the tree, a lot of the work that we do with removal is contracted out, especially the bigger trees, because we don't have the equipment to do it. The smaller trees, yes, we can, but they're the,
Got it.
3-inch, but once you start getting bigger,
tree removal
Okay.
is expensive.
Yeah.
So,
So 32,000 a year.
give or take, right.
Yeah.
Would it be possible to, in time for the budget, to get us an estimate
Yeah.
for outsourcing this to a company so that we could provide options to the residents
sure.
and be able to compare and contrast in-house versus outsourced?
And Jeff, do you have a recommended list of vendors that we should be approaching?
It's a very short list. It's one vendor.
Your company.
Yes.
Surprise, surprise.
I do, Councilman.
I'm sure staff has a list they
Yeah.
maintain.
Jeff?
And then you would offer the wholesale price as well?
Yes, we are a full-service tree care company. Outside of the scope of this agreement, yes, we would, of course.
Your company has done work in pretty much every city in the area.
Yeah, we currently have, so that program I outlined where we treat public trees, or the city elects to treat public trees and we offer a discount to homeowners, we currently have that arrangement in 25 metro, and I should say 25 Minnesota cities, so 24 metro, including Red Wing.
So will this work if the city does this with the public trees and 0 homeowners do anything?
Yeah,
Will it still work?
it will for your trees. Yep.
So the boulevards will be beautiful and everything else will look like a dump.
But it will degrade more slowly because you'll still be taking action to reduce that pest pressure.
But
Yeah.
I can't imagine if someone has a big, beautiful ash tree in their yard that they don't want to take care of.
I'm already using this stuff.
Are you?
Yeah.
I need a picture of an ash tree.
Jeff, what's
Some of
it
the
co-
early pictures were pictures of ash trees.
Jeff,
early
what's-
slides.
What's the average, so the average homeowner might have 2 ash trees in their yard.
Sure.
What would that cost to treat?
Well, through our municipal programs, the costs are about $6 per inch. So a 20-inch tree is $120 to treat, but that would be $60 annually because it's a 2-year treatment, so you're splitting it up. But that's a 20-inch tree, that's pretty big, so it's a very good value when you consider the benefits.
So I want to ask you, how does the resident program work in your other communities? Do you guys go out and say, we're in the neighborhood, this is what we're doing, the city of Victoria, or do the homeowners have to come to you?
They all communication directs homeowners to the vendor that is selected. Yep. But we work in partnership with the city communication staff to make sure that the messaging matches the goals of the municipality. So we work closely to make sure the postcards say what it wants, what everybody wants it to say. We take care of the creation and mailing of the postcards. We do flyers as utility bill inserts. We build landing pages for homeowners to sign up for free estimates online. All of that is done in partnership, but directing homeowners to the vendor so that the city can kind of stay out of it. You've made the offer and you've reduced prices, and then you kind of hand it off. And homeowners can always elect to work with whichever vendor they want. It's never an exclusive arrangement. Does that cover all those bases? Sure.
And I think of the water bill, since it goes out to virtually everybody, the insert, we can I think we can put inserts in. It doesn't cost us anything more than postage, so it's basically free to get it out.
I don't know that for a fact, but we absolutely have the ability to do inserts. I haven't seen our contract, so I don't know if there's an additional cost.
And I can tell you, I'm on auto pay, so I don't ever see anything like that.
They still mail you a bill, though.
Not
Oh.
on auto pay. I don't get a bill. Do I?
I get a bill.
It probably is emailed to you, possibly.
Well, we work to maximize all communication channels. So.
My assumption is the council would
Yeah.
take multiple paths, website,
Yes.
social media, inserts if appropriate, maybe direct mailings, but they just cost more money. So, council, additional questions?
This was encouraging.
I'm glad to hear that.
We're not doomed, so.
You're not. You're in a great spot. You have an inventory. You have time to choose a plan. You're in a great spot.
Dana, you don't need a motion or anything from the council to look at other options as far as,
No motion is necessary. I believe we have clarity unless Ann needs anything additional.
No, I think I'm good.
okay, Dana and council, anything else? Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Appreciate it.
everyone.
Thank you.
Next item, 7B, valet parking. Mr. Pat.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. Last year, we had a parking task force convene, and one of the recommendations coming out of that parking task force was to have a valet service that would be beneficial for all the businesses, better use of the empty spaces that are on the outskirts of downtown. Then Winchester Rye was opening. They approached the city staff and asked if they can use some of the public parking spaces for their own valet service. Staff encouraged having an open house meeting to discuss this proposal with all the business owners in downtown. And it was pretty clear that the business owners thought it was not very fair for one business to have 3 dedicated parking spaces for their own use. And so that's why we encourage Winchester Rye to reach out with other business owners to see if there's any type of a shared valet service that other business owners could benefit as well. So staff and the restaurant owners of Noble Lion, Winchester and Rye, and the School of Wise met with 2 different valet services over the last couple of weeks. And the 3 restaurant owners picked one valet service, Minneapolis Valet, which seemed to be more flexible than the other valet service. And the first time they used it was a couple weekends ago, and the first area that they used was behind the Norderman building here, where the crosshairs are. And they used that because they didn't need city council approval. They weren't using any public parking spaces. It's in front of the dumpster location. Cars would pull off into that little kind of it's almost like a driveway. And then the valet people would take the cars off and park them down, I think, Stagger Lake Lane. They parked 17 cars that first initial weekend. The owner of the Minneapolis Valet said that they would like to see some more interest, and they were recommending the area along Tower Boulevard as a potential drop-off spot. Staff looked at the proposal. It's located number 1 north of the Clock Tower building. Staff looked at that location and also recommended possibly using the location that would be north of the Mr. Gannon's property in the public parking lot as another option as well. I sent this out to the Minneapolis Valet and then 3 restaurant owners. They were encouraged and they thought this would be a good opportunity. So what staff is recommending is that the city council allow the use of 3 public parking spaces for valet service after 4 p.m. on Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays, nights at either location of number 1 or number 2. And again, these valet services would be open for anybody who wants to use any of the restaurants or any of the patrons. It doesn't dictate one of these 3 restaurants. So with that, we just want to give the business owners some flexibility of using some centralized locations if they deem necessary. With that, I'll take any questions.
All right, thanks. Before we discuss this, can I get a motion, please?
I'll make a motion.
Go ahead.
I'll make a motion to approve the use of 3 public parking spaces for the valet service after 4 p.m. on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday nights at a location to be determined as shown 1 or 2. We're going to pick one of those 2 locations.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, discussion. Can we go back to the map? So I think there'll be a little bit of discussion. Mr. Vogt, do you want to begin?
Well, first of all, I'd like to applaud the business community and our development people for coming up with this. We've been praying for some solutions, and I think this is going to be at least a very helpful solution for us. It's not the silver bullet. I noticed today I had lunch at Winchester and Rye, and I noticed 2 new handicap spaces right in front of Winchester and Rye on the other side of the street where this number 1 is. Go to the other side of the street, down to the opposite end of the block. Were those additive spaces, or were they changed from another place?
They've been there at least for 2 months. And before that,
I'm not really observant. I've been parking in them a lot. I've got a little.
I think some of the construction activity kind of hit them for a while.
Okay. So for that reason, this is a very congested area. This is just me. I prefer spot number 2 because it doesn't dilute this highly congested, important area, because this is Tower Boulevard is very, it's a fast-moving area. So I just would, if number 2 is usable, that looks better to me. Just to get this action a little bit out of the, have it very accessible, but it's out of the loop a little bit behind the Gannon building. That's my opinion.
So, question for you. Because you can't see where I'm pointing, I'm going to try to verbally guide you here. Randy's Way is between number 2 and the Creamery building, right? That's
Correct.
Randy's Way. If you go down on this map south and you come just before the intersection with Tower Boulevard, instead of taking up parking spaces, why not set aside, if there's a valet stand there and people drive up, the drivers get in the car and go, why couldn't we authorize, because that's not a through road per se, if cars come up from the north end, valet station is there, they drop off the keys, the driver can take the car, take a left on Tower, take a left on the other side, go down, or go wherever they need to go, if you will, to park the car. We're not taking up the spots, and that's also central. Could we do something like that? Was that something you guys considered? Because I'm assuming you're not going to be blocking traffic. You're going to be moving the cars pretty quick.
The other location, so the Minneapolis Valet owner suggested 2 locations. The one, number 1, and then the one just north of the borough building, which would be on Tower Boulevard, which is kind of the same scenario the mayor is suggesting, which would be basically stopping on the street, having the valets moving the cars out. Staff looked at that, and they'd prefer not to have the cars stopping on the street because it blocks traffic either on Tower Boulevard or on Randy's Way. And so that's what staff's recommendation was, number 1 or number 2. They're off the street. People can move in. You can still get the cars going that aren't using the valet service through the streets. The benefit of number 1 over number 2 is that it's just more centrally located.
Yeah.
And that was, again, the recommendation of the valet owner. And he was also mentioning on Tower Boulevard, but staff would recommend not using Tower Boulevard north of the borough because of on the street.
So let me, functionally, I'm trying to get this in my head how this would actually work. If we're using, let's just say, for example, number 1, does a car actually pull in, you get out, hand them the keys, then they have to back out into the street and then drive off?
That is correct. So you are able, and if you have 3, you're able to have somebody come in, park, and have multiple people using the valet service at the same time. They don't have to wait. They just pull in, park, hand the keys off, and go to the restaurant.
I like number one.
Are we talking 2 or 3 spaces?
3.
3 is what they're
Phew,
recommending.
That's a lot of spaces in the heart of
Right,
Victoria.
we had 17 cars. If we were doing something like what I suggested, they're not going to be on the street that long. It's not like we're going to have cars lined up around the block. And if the person's just getting out, give them their key, you get your number, right? And you're done. And the car, you don't have to back it in and back it out, which just takes more time. And quite frankly, I think as people are trying to pull in, you're just going to have more chances for little bumps and fender benders. Seems to me if they just drive up, it's a quicker exchange and the car's gone. And at the volume of cars that we're getting, and we can always revisit it if the volume of cars is starting to cause a traffic problem. I just don't see where the traffic problem is going to come from.
Where are they taking these cars?
Sauger Lake Lane, and then also the Hartman's building. Thank you, office
So
building.
it takes 5 minutes to take the car out of here and come back.
I don't know what the time is.
So there could be 3, 4 cars piling up, depending on how busy it is.
Right.
So Judy was asking me, and the spot I was talking about is, are we taking up spots? And I said, no, we're not. I don't think there's any parking spots in the location I suggested. And Judy, you had other comments?
Yes, because the reason that I thought number one was the better idea is, for one reason, is it is centrally located. People can park, and then they've got equal disbursement to any business around there. Number two is this part of that end of the building is.
She's pointing at
Number one.
Number one, the parking spots.
I'm pointing at number one. At the end of the building, that's businesses that park there. So evenings, they're not really going to be there. That's for extra people. If you want people to valet, you need to make it easy for them. I can tell you that when I saw that it was over behind the Noterman building, it's like, well, why am I going to give valet $5 to park my car and then walk another block or two? So you do want, you want to encourage them to use the valet so that there's more than 17 people. They can't stay in business that way. So this street could actually end up being the valet street. When
The Randy's Way, you mean, or Towers Boulevard?
the Towers Boulevard.
Yeah, and let's not lose sight of the fact that only 17 people use it, but we haven't advertised it
Well,
yet.
yeah,
It's just
nobody
getting
knew.
started. Right, it's just getting started, so I'm sure we'll see an increase.
And I think that this would end up being a lot busier with
The-
drop-offs
You're pointing at number one?
at number one, yes.
I agree with Ms. Black. Location number one is more visible, even though there is 3 spots, it's more visible. And people, I mean, it's going to be key. It's also close to all 3 restaurants, essentially, closest to all 3 restaurants. We got School of the Wise, Winchester, and Rye, and the Borough. So it's somewhat centrally located.
And Victoria House.
All 3 of those and Victoria House. Sorry, I didn't mean to leave them out. And location number 2 is a little more hidden, even though when I did come through last weekend and they had the signage out there, signage is huge. You're not going to have trouble finding it if you want to use valet parking. So the signage is good, but I think having it more centrally located is best. The idea of stopping on the street, even though it would be good to not have to utilize some of our valuable spaces. I think if you park on the street, you're going to create some confusion, and with the number of pedestrians in the area, people are going to be passing, trying to get around people that are parked on the street. So I don't think that's a great idea. I would just choose number 1.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. This is not like downtown Minneapolis. If you've ever used valet services down there, there's a lot more traffic. I don't see where we're going to cause a traffic issue. But that said, if that's not what the council wants to do, that's fine. We could always try this and see how it goes. I'm fine with the number. I agree with the central location. And the more visible we make it, the more it's going to get utilized. Was there any other business owners outside of the restaurants raise objections to this, and they're not being asked to contribute to this, right?
No.
No. So the three main restaurant owners are essentially putting up the $300, and then the $500 per valet service eats away that $300. So hopefully the goal is none of the restaurant owners are paying anything, and the valet service is making money, and you have enough people using the valet service.
Do we have any sense from the valet service provider how long it would take to sort of build that clientele? Is it, is he giving it 3 to 6 months? Is he giving it?
He didn't give us any time frames, but he's done this the last couple of weeks. He thinks it is possible to make some money here, that the service is needed, but a more centrally located spot would be helpful.
So is he doing his own signage, or are we responsible for signage on that?
He's doing his own signage.
So is there going to be a contract? So he can't just, if he becomes disillusioned with the volume, can't just walk?
So yes, he can walk anytime if
Okay.
it's not working out, and that's why we're trying to help him. But we do have other valet services to fall back on if necessary.
Because I would love the idea of, a big splash in the newspaper, Victoria goes valet. I think it's an awesome idea. And who else has that?
So it
around
sounds.
us?
It sounds like there's a consensus to move it to number one. Deb, did you have something to add, or would you agree, disagree?
No, I agree. I think we want to make this successful for them and successful for our businesses. So number one is absolutely the most centrally located, and I think that would be the one that I would select as well.
All right, so we've got a valid motion. Is there any other final comments?
Just additional comments. Did you look at what would happen if you tried to do this alongside the building across from the borough,
The clock tower building?
Gannon building? If you did this whole operation on the street parallel down Tower Boulevard alongside that building, instead of using any parking spots at all, just to use the whole side of that building.
Oh,
Is there enough room to get cars through there?
Well, that was the second option that the valet owner was suggesting, and that's what the staff had concerns with. Again, putting the cars on the streets, not knowing if there's going to be a valet person attending when somebody pulls up, so they'd rather have the cars go into a parking lot. Versus,
because if they're running a car, there may not be somebody standing.
right.
Right.
You could have 4
would
people
they have
waiting.
How many people would the valet service have in Victoria?
Again, I think they started with 2. They can go up to 3, but it all depends on the volume.
Got it.
Do they designate hours? I suppose they can't go until they get rid of all the
Right.
keys.
So, well, I think they try to designate hours so somebody is not staying until 2 o'clock. I think it was from 5 to 11 is pretty much where these 3 main restaurants are open.
Got it.
Council, any final comments? If not, we have a valid motion. Council selected number one. If there's no final comments, all in favor of the motion with the selection of number one signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none, motion carries unanimously.
So this will go into effect immediately.
Right. I'll notify the valet service and the 3 restaurants, and hopefully they can move it over. And the city hasn't done any advertising yet either, because we wanted to kind of find a location before we did something on Facebook.
All right, thank you, Pat.
Oh, Mayor, one more thing. Do we have some agreement with the valet company or the restaurants or something to kind of keep us abreast of what's happening, how it's growing?
We don't have an agreement, but I kind of do that just for my own curiosity.
I'm sure if it's not working, they'll let us know.
Thank you.
Dana, roundtable, since this is the new agenda that we've got going, for the benefit to remind the council and let the public know, do you want just to take a minute and talk about this?
Certainly. At our last meeting, Mayor and members of the council, we had adopted a new format for the agenda. While it wasn't, we're not really truly running with it quite yet. We're almost there. But roundtable was one of the new items. And the purpose of that is to essentially allow members of the council to bring up a topic or something. Say, for example, if somebody in the public has approached you with a concern, or you're hearing from people, or you've read something and you've got new information and it's not on our radar, so to speak, for getting something on the agenda, this would be an opportunity for you to check in with your colleagues and direct staff to look into something with consensus from your colleagues.
Got it.
So just a quick additional clarification, Mayor, members of the council. So this would be for items that are not planned or currently on the printed agenda or planned as a future item at the moment.
So it's kind of these ad hoc things that come up at the last minute?
Correct.
Got it. And we're not going to take any action as a council, it's just to give staff some direction on a particular topic?
Yes, to do some research or to spend resources, whether it's time, expenditures, or additional work to bring information back so you have information to make a decision or direct staff further.
Perfect. Thank you, Dana. With that said, anything on roundtable for tonight's meeting?
Well, I think this would be a good opportunity. I think we did receive an email regarding the 13 and a half acres. There was supposed to be a workshop tonight, and that got canceled, and I'm not quite sure. But we do have some people here from DGR Architect, and I know there's been some discussions, meeting with some of the team members. I think most of us have met with them at least once, maybe twice or three times. And I think from the strategic planning, I think we all kind of have the same thought. We want to continue working with them, but we also want the process to keep moving forward. I think there's another component, which is this Livable Communities Act grant, which we are kind of under a timeline on that. From my understanding, it needs to be in by July 1st. And in speaking with the developers, this is kind of a big deal. This is it takes a while to put this together. Based on some of their comments, they would like to have 8 to 12 weeks to put this together, and we're down to 4 weeks to put this together. Also, further more communication. This team has applied for this grant for the past 10 years. They've been awarded it for the past 10 years, and that's a pretty good track record. And I would like to see if there's any thought on the council that we would like to possibly move this up. I know this may come up on the June 10th meeting, but I think it's important enough that we should consider having a possible special meeting, special workshop, either Friday or Monday, to try to have some discussion, get everybody together, make sure we're all on the same page, staff, the team, and the council. Any other thoughts?
Dana and I took a few minutes and we were talking about this just before the council meeting. Unfortunately, with Dana traveling, we didn't have time to connect before. And I think your point of view that you described to me just before the council meeting is important here. So if you wouldn't mind, would you share that, please?
Certainly, Mayor, members of the council. This is the LCDA grant, so the Livable Communities Grant is for development, and it's one of 4 different kind of grants that the Met Council awards cities. I believe it's about $7.5 million that gets distributed in 2019 to multiple cities, and it is a competitive process. Applications close on July 1st. Before I left on my vacation, Mr. Smith and I did have an opportunity to talk, and this was something that was on both of our radars. So we've already actually begun compiling information, and we intend to apply for that. However, in order to make that application, 2 things need to happen. The first and the most important piece is we need to have a development agreement, and we have to be working with the developer. So while we're having conversations and negotiations with the development team, our friends who are here this evening, we don't yet have a signed development agreement. So that's the first important step. The next is that the council must take action to approve a resolution, and part of that resolution a whereas clause would talk about the development agreement. The other thing as part of the application, we're fast tracking as much as we can do, but that application process does require some detail work, including things such as drawings, And we just don't have those specific details yet. Our developer friends have been a little reluctant to provide that level of detail to us as staff because we don't yet have a signed agreement. So while we're working for that, Mr. Smith has reached out to them. Recently, he met with them while I was out of the country in the last week or so, and we've reached out to them. We're waiting to hear back from the development team on what works for them this week to meet. We've asked for written parameters, so to speak, so we can start drafting the development agreement so we can move forward with that and wrap the application process into that. So the staff timeline was June 10th. We were hopeful that we would have information and do a workshop tonight with the developers to get into some of that detail, and they've asked to postpone that. So with that being said, our timeline is June 10th for bringing something back, hopefully a written development agreement for you all to consider, and then June 24th for the resolution. That would kind of be the bow on the package. Everything will be ready to go, and we could have that be the last piece, and we would be able to submit the application shortly thereafter, and we feel that we would meet the July, we'd make it a priority. We would absolutely meet that July 1st deadline.
So thank you. A couple of real quick comments. I agree with Mr. Gregory. I want to do everything possible to expedite this, but it sounds that from your perspective, we don't need a special meeting or a special workshop. You guys are already well on the way. And is it, I mean, Dean is here, who you're working with. Based on that discussion, my assumption is, Dean, if you want to come up real quick since I'm speaking to you, my assumption is you'll work with staff, assuming the council agrees with me, you'll work with staff to quickly expedite getting an agreement put together with however that needs to be done.
Absolutely. Dean DeVolis, TJ Architecture, 33 West Avenue North. Good evening. Absolutely. And yeah, we've been going full speed ahead, and we're actually drafting up the outline of the agreement right now to get to you guys. And yeah, so we're planning, and we never meant to delay the meeting. It may have been a misunderstanding, but we want to get going because we do want to take advantage of the grant process and all that, because the LCD is probably one of the most attractive because it's just a pure grant. It's not a loan. It's not a deal. And the nature of the plan we have put together really fits their criteria, which innovative planning that other cities can use. And because of your work with downtown, because of the acceptance of the plan, I believe we have a very high eligibility for this grant. Even though it's competitive, I think we're in good position to score well on this.
Okay, thank you. Hold that. I want to remind the council, and we'll figure this out. Roundtable, we shouldn't get into a deep discussion with this. It was just a quick comment. Mr. Gregory and I kind of said, yeah, we want to see this go, but I know each of you probably have your own thoughts. So
I'm on the same boxcar with you.
okay.
That's good.
Yes, we all want to see this move forward.
You know, if you didn't mean to delay the meeting, should we be having the meeting that we were going to have? As Councilor Gregory said, should we be having it soon rather than later?
It's a good meeting to make sure everyone's on the same page and just talk through that everyone has the same vision, ideas as a group, which would be staff, council, and ourselves. And, you know, we can keep it limited, not to make an all-nighter, you know, if you say an hour time certain or whatever. But I think I would highly recommend that meeting, make sure everyone hears the same thing and we're all in agreement with the vision.
Sooner rather than later.
Sooner is very important because we want the LCDA to really reflect the wish of council, our wishes, and staff wishes. So it becomes really a jointly authored document.
And the thing, Dean, I've heard, I'm not sure if you said it or if I heard it from someone else, in the process of applying for the grant, you can submit a certain amount of paperwork to get your foot in the door on the grant and meet the deadlines. And if you have to submit some detail a few days later or a week later, it's possible. Is that,
Yeah,
am I hearing
see,
something like that?
yeah, be careful of that. Don't.
Careful.
It's Met Council, and the problem is other cities say, why them and not us? So
Yeah,
that's
so
dangerous territory. So I think my opinion is July 1st is July 1st, period.
Hard stop.
Okay, for everything.
Hard stop.
For everything.
Correct.
So do we need to meet with you prior to June 10th?
I'd like us to give Dana the opportunity to work with staff and the developer first, and then if that doesn't produce the results and the consistency, then we can either have a workshop, or we can call a special meeting if we need to do that. Dana?
Mayor, members of the council, just a quick note. Part of the reason we wanted to regroup back with you all on, originally planned for tonight was because you've all met with the developers individually. We wanted to make sure that we circled back and that we're all hearing the same thing and that we're all on the same page. And so we thought it was important to say, here's what we think we heard, here's what we think the consensus is. So that, with that, we're moving forward because we think we have clarity, and we think when I've visited with you all individually and things that we've collectively heard, we're taking that information and using that to populate the application data. So we're still doing stuff. So staff is still comfortable with a June 10th timeline for a presentation. We think that if there's clarity that comes out of that, we still have enough time to add that into the application to kind of amplify it. But we're not going to wait until June 10th. We believe we know what the will of the council is, and we're using that information to help us move forward with this application.
Got it. Thank you. Deb, anything to add?
Nope.
All right, so I think,
Just one.
go ahead.
This grant, it sounds like it's a complicated process to prepare for this grant, and you have a proven track record. Is there a reason why we wouldn't want to try to utilize that expertise as much as possible? I mean, from what I'm hearing,
Who's that question for?
well, is it a complicated process?
It is complicated because it's two steps because it really requires readiness, a description of why the project deserves a grant. It needs the numbers, meaning you have to have construction estimates, you have to have developers' financials as part of it. So there's a lot of pieces, and then obviously the architectural images and reason itself. So there's a lot of pieces that get poured into this document. So the answer is yes, it is complicated. It needs all parties to contribute towards it.
And what's the maximum allowable?
$2 million.
And did you get that last year?
We applied, so Bridgewater Bank was the one we received last year. And in that case, we applied for $1.3 million and received $1.3 million.
So unless there's objection by the council or something else, what I'd like to do is have Dana and staff work with them, and then Dana, if you think that there's a need for the council to get together in a special meeting or workshop,
Absolutely.
let me know and we can pull that together. It sounds like there'd be a consensus on the council should it become necessary. Otherwise, we'll work off of your timeline.
So who's putting together the grant paperwork?
Mayor, members of the council member vote. Staff would be working jointly with our developers to our development
Okay,
team.
so there's not a resource issue, because I would recommend you get extra horses if, we need.
No, they're working
I
together.
I have a few ponies at the office that can help me. So the answer is yes.
So it sounds like you're going to work with staff.
Yep.
Dana, you'll get back to the council if we need to do.
Absolutely, Mayor.
Call a special meeting or do anything else.
We're happy to do that.
And we're comfortable with the approach. So
Thank you. Council, Pat, anything to add? Okay, thank you very much.
thank you very much.
So that concludes roundtable. Now we do reports. Bob, you want to go first? Bob? Go ahead, Dana.
Nothing from me tonight.
The council? Deb, anything?
Nothing, thank you.
Mr. Vogt?
Nothing.
Judy?
I don't today.
Mr. Gregory?
No report.
I've got one quick update on Zumbra. I've reported before about what's happening. Unfortunately, I forgot to bring the numbers with me. We have surpassed, from the information I've been given, we have surpassed the precipitation levels from 2014 where Zumbra flooded and we had to do sandbags. We believe that's attributable to the maintenance work that was done where that canal was dredged out, because by opening that up, water was able to start running and draining from that entire basin. It's about 2,000 acres up there. Water was able to drain as soon as things unfroze, and enough water drained out so the capacity was there to take this extra rain. Now, just today, we went and put in the ordinance was passed a couple of years ago because the water with the recent rains did get up to the ordinary high water mark. But I was out there today with Commissioner Workman, meeting with Dick Hawley, and there's water in some of the low spots, but none of the homes are flooding. So we clearly made progress. I'm not suggesting it's done, but that maintenance work done by the watershed with the help of Three Rivers Park and the county and the other agencies involved has clearly made a difference. I think we've avoided what would have been a flood issue if you look solely at the level of precipitation between 2014 and this year. So I just wanted to provide a quick update on that. I don't have anything else.
Yeah, that just, I mean, Mayor Funk and Councilman, Commissioner Workman, Dick Hawley have done a tremendous amount of work on that. And I think the homeowners from Zumbra are in good hands there, because it really could have created an issue had that not been taken care of. And that's an issue that's been hanging around for probably 40, 50 years. And so it's finally getting addressed.
Yeah, I was corrected. I said when I originally announced it, work hasn't been done in 20 years. I was routinely corrected, and they told me it's been 52 years since any work's been done up there.
Wow.
So it's like, wow, okay, yeah, maybe it was time, huh?
So is it possible that a problem still could come forward if we get another big rain?
It is. The real question is, if we have a dry summer, will enough drainage occur so that by the time we come back to the next spring, if you think 2,000 acres and that can actually drain down to the point where the culvert out of Zumbra potentially has the potential to actually get out of water, and that's roughly about a 2-foot drop. So will that happen? I don't know. Ask me late fall, and we'll find out whether or not it's drained that much water. But we suspect there may be some more work that potentially has to be done, another drainage, or possibly the culvert under Channel 11 or County Road 11. So we don't know, but what we do know is we've clearly made a difference. Zumbra is not flooding, and we've got more rain. So, Council, anything else? Any other reports? If not, I move we adjourn. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.